Today, when we think of alcohol, we picture elegant wine cellars, massive craft breweries, or a Friday night out with friends. We naturally assume that drinking alcohol is a luxurious habit invented by modern civilization, something that only happened after we learned how to farm and build cities. But what if I told you that our relationship with alcohol did not start with human civilization? In fact, it started millions of years before we even learned how to speak, build a fire, or walk perfectly upright. The astonishing truth is that consuming alcohol was not a fun prehistoric hobby. It was actually a fierce, life-or-death evolutionary advantage. How did consuming alcohol stop our earliest ancestors from starving to death? And how did a single, miraculous genetic mutation 10 million years ago save humanity from extinction? The answer will completely change the way you look at your next glass of beer. Let's step back to the dense jungles of the Miocene epoch, roughly 10 million years ago. Our distant primate ancestors were primarily fruit eaters, living high up in the safety of the forest canopy. They relied entirely on fresh, sugary fruits to survive. However, as the global climate drastically changed and ancient forests began to thin out, food became incredibly scarce. Driven by pure starvation, some of these early apes were forced to climb down from the trees and desperately forage for whatever food they could find on the dangerous, unforgiving forest floor. This is exactly where we encounter the groundbreaking drunken monkey hypothesis, a fascinating concept popularized by evolutionary biologist Dr. Robert Dudley. When ripe fruit falls from the high branches and hits the warm, humid jungle floor, its skin breaks open. Naturally occurring wild yeast in the environment immediately attacks the exposed sugary flesh of the fruit, triggering a rapid chemical process known as fermentation. This natural fermentation process converts the fruit's natural sugars into ethanol, which is the exact same type of alcohol found in your modern beer, wine, and liquor. But why would our starving ancestors actively choose to eat rotting, fermented fruit instead of looking for fresh food? The answer comes down to brilliant, desperate survival mechanics. First, fermentation produces a very strong, distinct alcoholic odor. In a dense, overgrown jungle where visibility is extremely low, our ancestors could use their highly developed sense of smell to track down this alcoholic scent from great distances. The smell of alcohol acted like a chemical beacon, leading them directly to a hidden, life-saving food source. Second, and far more importantly, alcohol is incredibly dense in calories. In fact, ethanol contains nearly twice as many calories per gram as standard carbohydrates. For a starving ape desperately searching for energy in a brutal prehistoric wilderness, an overripe, slightly alcoholic fruit was basically a high-energy nutritional goldmine. By intentionally consuming this alcohol-laced fruit, our ancestors gained a massive caloric advantage over other competing animals. It allowed them to store essential fat, maintain high energy levels, and ultimately survive long enough to reproduce. Drinking alcohol was not an early form of entertainment. It was a highly efficient, necessary survival strategy. But there is a massive, incredibly deadly flaw in this survival strategy. If eating fermented fruit was such a fantastic, energy-rich food source, why didn't every other animal on the forest floor do the exact same thing? The answer is simple and terrifying: intoxication. For most animals, consuming high levels of ethanol is a rapid death sentence. In the brutal, unforgiving environment of the prehistoric jungle, being drunk is arguably the absolute worst thing that can possibly happen to you. If a primate consumes too much alcohol, they immediately lose their physical balance. Their reaction time drastically slows down, and their vision becomes heavily blurred. A deeply intoxicated ape, blindly stumbling around the dangerous jungle floor, instantly becomes an effortless, easy meal for massive prehistoric predators, like giant ancient snakes or big cats. To successfully survive, our ancestors desperately needed a way to absorb the life-saving calories from the alcohol without actually getting drunk and losing their minds. This is exactly where one of the most miraculous and highly specific genetic mutations in all of human history took place. Around 10 million years ago, long before fully modern humans even existed, our ancient primate ancestors experienced a random but incredibly fortunate mutation in a specific gene known as ADH4. This particular gene is responsible for producing an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase. In simple terms, this enzyme is the vital chemical tool that your digestive system and liver use to break down, process, and clear alcohol from your bloodstream. Before this specific mutation occurred, our ancient ancestors processed alcohol very slowly and poorly, just like most modern monkeys or other mammals do today. But the new, mutated version of the ADH4 gene was an absolute biological game-changer. It suddenly made this alcohol-digesting enzyme an astonishing 40 times more efficient at breaking down ethanol. This massive evolutionary upgrade meant that our ancient ancestors could safely gorge themselves on highly fermented, calorie-dense rotting fruits, rapidly process the dangerous alcohol through their system, and absorb all the vital energy without losing their crucial motor skills. They could eat the fermented fruit, get the massive calorie boost, and still be perfectly alert enough to run away from hungry predators. This 10-million-year-old genetic mutation essentially gave ancient humans an exclusive, high-energy food source that competing animals simply could not safely consume. Without this ancient, unseen biological superpower, humanity would have likely starved to death on the forest floor. Let us fast forward millions of years from those dense, prehistoric jungles to the dawn of the Neolithic Revolution, roughly 12,000 years ago. If you open any standard history textbook, you will read a very straightforward narrative about the birth of human civilization. The books claim that nomadic hunter-gatherers suddenly realized they could plant wild wheat, so they decided to settle down, invent farming, and bake bread. According to this traditional story, agriculture gave humans a stable food supply, allowing them to build the very first cities. However, modern archaeological discoveries are turning this classic narrative completely upside down. It is known as the beer before bread hypothesis, suggesting our ancestors did not settle down for food. They settled down for a prehistoric party. To understand this mind-blowing theory, we must look at Göbekli Tepe, a massive archaeological site located in modern-day Turkey. Built around 11,000 years ago, it is officially recognized as the oldest temple in the world. What makes Göbekli Tepe so incredibly fascinating is that it was constructed entirely by nomadic hunter-gatherers, long before the official invention of agriculture or pottery. Within this monumental stone complex, archaeologists have discovered massive stone vats and troughs, capable of holding over 40 gallons of liquid. When scientists conducted deep chemical analyses on these ancient containers, they found undeniable traces of oxalate, a specific chemical byproduct that is only created during the process of brewing grain into beer. This discovery asks a profound question. Why would prehistoric hunter-gatherers endure the exhausting physical labor required to harvest wild grains, domesticate crops, and build massive stone temples? Baking a simple loaf of bread is practical, but it hardly inspires a nomadic tribe to completely change their entire way of life. However, brewing a psychoactive liquid that dramatically alters human consciousness, severely reduces social anxiety, and promotes intense community bonding during sacred religious rituals, that is a remarkably powerful motivator. Furthermore, the complex process of brewing beer requires a steady supply of grain, heavy equipment, and a stationary location. You simply cannot brew massive vats of beer while you are constantly migrating. Therefore, many experts now argue that ancient humans were originally motivated to cultivate crops, not to bake bread for basic survival, but to brew beer for religious festivals. Alcohol was the ultimate social catalyst that essentially forced humanity to invent agriculture, directly laying the foundational building blocks for all modern civilization. The ultimate irony of our relationship with alcohol is how drastically its purpose has shifted throughout human history. 10 million years ago, the ability to process ethanol was not a social luxury or a weekend habit. It was a desperate, life-saving biological superpower. The ADH4 genetic mutation stopped our primate ancestors from starving to death on the unforgiving jungle floor by allowing them to safely eat calorie-dense rotting fruit. Fast forward millions of years to the dawn of civilization, and that exact same chemical compound transformed into the ultimate social glue. It motivated ancient humans to build monumental stone temples, invent agriculture, and lay the foundational blocks for modern society. We literally owe our survival and our complex civilization to a random genetic mutation and a handful of overripe, fermented fruits. However, it is time for a very important modern disclaimer. While our ancient ancestors survived by consuming naturally fermented fruit, the alcohol they ingested was incredibly weak, usually containing less than 1 or 2% ethanol. Modern beer, wine, and distilled liquor contain massively concentrated levels of alcohol that our prehistoric bodies were simply never designed to handle in large quantities. So, while you can thank human evolution for your ability to process a drink, please always enjoy it responsibly. Never use prehistoric evolutionary biology as an excuse to overindulge. If learning the astonishing truth about our ancient relationship with alcohol blew your mind, hit that like button and subscribe for more mind-bending history myths busted. Let us know in the comments, do you believe the beer before bread theory? Keep wondering, keep learning, and as always, stay simply ancient.